In this video, I'm going to be talking about what differentiates nonprofit leadership from for-profit leadership. And I get asked this question a lot. Why don't I just teach communication management? Why don't I just teach leadership? Aren't they exactly the same thing? And one of the things that I've tried to instill in my students is, in fact, there are some similarities between for-profit and nonprofit leadership, and government leadership for that matter. But there are some key factors that distinguish nonprofit leadership from those other forms. And they have to do with the somewhat complicated way that nonprofits respond to multiple stakeholders and deal with very different priorities. So one of the things that is often true for nonprofit organizations is that they are not exchanging products and services for at market rates with the beneficiaries. Instead, what happens is that nonprofit organizations are relying on donations or government contracts in order to generate the revenue for those programs and services, but the beneficiaries who receive them aren't involved in the transaction. That makes for a really complicated funding model for many organizations and requires different types of strategic communication as a result. For example, let's say that you were providing services as a nonprofit organization to those who are experiencing homelessness. And you decided that you wanted to provide the best programs that you possibly could. You wanted to make sure that people were in long-term housing right off the bat. So none of this emergency transitional housing, and that housing would be private and would be in a safe neighborhood. And in fact, that you would work with folks when they came in to establish the broad set of needs that they have so that they could establish employment and deal with any mental or health or substance abuse issues that they're having. And you would want to provide counseling, certainly, for folks who were dealing with these things. You would want to provide a top flight service. Now, as you begin to think about that, what's the problem that you might experience? Well, maybe you're not going to be able to afford all of the things that you would want to do in order to meet your mission. And your mission is to end homelessness. But the people who are paying you in order to deliver on that mission aren't the people who are the customers, right? So this divorce between the beneficiaries of those programs and services and the revenue engine that is needed to make it work is one of the features that makes nonprofit leadership different than for-profit leadership. In for-profit leadership, if you were providing housing and you provided a great quality product at a good price, that's it. You've got one stakeholder to really address, and that's your consumer. In nonprofits, you're not only addressing your beneficiaries' needs and concerns, but you have to meet the needs and concerns of a secondary party who's providing the funding. And so that means that there's often really fuzzy boundaries around managing this double bottom line. And you have to manage different types of constituencies, some with really lofty visions about what you're supposed to do as an organization, and failing to recognize the realities on the ground. Moreover, nonprofit organizations, though they don't always, often do rely on volunteers. Volunteer management is different than staff management. Volunteers are there for different reasons, and they don't receive financial compensation for their efforts. And so it creates a different type of relationship with those individuals who are performing work for your organization. They often do things that you wouldn't expect them to do. And you have to think twice about being too hard on them because soon you might not have any volunteers. And so those factors make it often difficult for for-profit leaders to step into positions of leadership in nonprofit organizations because they don't have the same carrots and sticks that they had in their for-profit frameworks and experiences. So this is one of the reasons why I love teaching nonprofit leadership and nonprofit communication management as distinct from for-profit leadership. Because I think that although many of the tools that you could use in the nonprofit space would work in the for-profit space quite well, vice versa is not always true. Often leaders who come from the for-profit space struggle in the nonprofit space. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought, and I'll look forward to having a bigger conversation with you about this topic in the future.